Hello and welcome to the Materialism Podcast, an exploration of the past, present, and future of material science and engineering. My name is Taylor Sparks. I'm an associate professor and associate chair of material science and engineering at the University of Utah, and I'm joined as always by my trusty co-host, Andrew Falkowski. How you doing, Andrew?
It's still hot. I've been waiting forever for the fall weather, but I guess we're not going to get that. But I'm doing well. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to hear it, man. Yeah, we are in the thick of things. I've got my first midterm tomorrow. We're in the middle of the semester, so it's busy times, but it's kind of fun times. Football's back on. We're teaching in person. Life is pretty good. Now, today we've got a super cool episode. If you remember, almost 2 years ago, can you believe that, Andrew? Crazy. Almost 2 years ago, on episode 12, we did an episode called Recycling and the Science of Separation, I think it was called. And if you remember on that episode, we talked about this giant change that came about when China decided that they didn't want our junk anymore, right? That they weren't going to recycle our junk. And if they were going to recycle it, they wanted it to be a totally different level of purity. And we said at the time that that was changing the game for recycling. And little did we know just how much so. Today, we're sitting down with Cassie Bradley of INEOS Styrolutions. Her title there is the Sustainability and Circular Economy Manager. How cool is that? A whole dedicated position towards this concept of making polymers completely reusable. Cassie, thanks for joining us. Nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So as you mentioned, I'm Sustainability and Circular Economy Manager at INEOS Styrolution. So essentially that means I'm the focal point for all of our sustainability initiatives. A heavy component of that is our polystyrene recycling initiatives, but we of course have many broader activities as well.
Very cool. And a bit about yourself. You were a chemie undergrad, right, at UIUC. You went to Dow for a while. Yeah, absolutely. A great school for material science. I don't know about chemical engineering, but for material science, they're always top five, like a really, really good school. And you went to Dow, which is one of these mega companies, one of these storied American, phenomenal, chemical enterprises. And I'm curious, what prompted you to switch? What moved you over to INEOS?
Well, I had a great time at Dow. So as I mentioned, I'm from Illinois. I went to college in Illinois. I moved down to Freeport, Texas. So Dow has a huge facility down there, and it was really exciting to be around a bunch of engineers and chemical industry folks and really just take a swim in the huge chemical complex experience. Ultimately, I ended up moving back to Illinois to be a little closer to home. And I found a position at INEOS Styrolution. So I started off originally at INEOS in a production engineering role. So similar to what I was doing at Dow, it's a very in the field experience, think hard hat and steel-toed boots type of thing.
Yep.
So it was very similar to what I'd been doing at Dow. And so it was a great fit.
So what prompted the switch back over towards management, right? Because I see that you're doing an MBA now. You're moving into a managerial role. Was that just interest, or was there just opportunity, or what?
A little bit of both. So I had always known that I wanted to go back and get an MBA and move more to the business side. So at heart, I'm really just a curious person. And so that's
Okay.
what prompted me to study engineering, is to learn how things worked, and was really interested in science. And then ultimately, of course, my curiosity doesn't end with engineering. I want to learn how the business world works and how markets work. So I always knew I wanted to go back and get an MBA. And of course, INEOS Styrolution knew I had that interest as well. So when they started the sustainability initiative and founded this new role. So, yep, sustainability and circular economy manager wasn't something that existed before. So they kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, you know a lot about plastics production. Do you want to get into sustainability?" And I said, "Absolutely. It sounds exciting."
Yeah, I wonder if I could ask like my grandpa, like if this sort of position existed, if he could have even believed it back in the day. Like, I think it really shows where companies' heads are at in terms of resonating with what consumers want, which is responsible companies interested in sustainability and circular economy. How cool that there is actually positions like that at companies like this. So maybe you could briefly tell us, just summarize briefly, how does the technology work that you guys are trying to go after?
So there's not just one type of technology. So we have several different projects in the works. One of them is traditional mechanical recycling of polystyrene, for instance, although we also have mechanically recycled ABS products available as well, for example. But of course, mechanical recycling is the traditional. You take the plastic, you chop it up into pieces, you melt it in an extruder, and then you reform it into new plastics. Whereas now the technologies that are emerging are under this umbrella called advanced recycling. And there's several different types. One that we are looking at specifically for polystyrene is called depolymerization. So that's where you take the plastic, you probably chop it up as well, and then you use heat to break that polymer back down into its individual monomer molecules. So in the case of polystyrene, the output from depolymerization is styrene monomer, and that's a liquid.
For real?
Yeah, and then
That's
you,
easy to do? That's really surprising you can actually do that.
yeah, I don't know if I would say it's easy, but we certainly can do it. Um,
Sure.
and so then that styrene monomer that's a liquid is what is the raw material that we use currently for polystyrene production, but also the raw material for all the specialties polymer products that we make as well. So we can take that polystyrene and make it into new products that are identical to the products made from traditional materials versus, with mechanical recycling, that's where you think of like the gray color or the brown color because those impurities aren't
Yeah.
separated out.
So I'm curious. I mean, the temperature to melt it down and then re-extrude it, is it what's the difference between that and this temperature to, I guess, break it down into its monomer components?
Right. So it does require more energy and a higher temperature. So in mechanical recycling, when you chop it up and then you melt it down, you're putting in a little bit of heat, and there is some impact that that heat has on the material. So the material properties of mechanically recycled product are slightly different than before you recycled it. And that's where sometimes with mechanical recycling, uh, folks will tell you that you can only do that so many times, like maybe 5 to 7 times before the properties are so different that it cannot be reused for the same original application again. Whereas with depolymerization, for instance, you're using much more heat, but you're purposefully breaking down those polymer chains.
Oh, it's
Instead of,
surprising you can do that.
yeah. So instead of inadvertently maybe breaking off a couple molecules from the chain at the ends, you're actually purposefully breaking it all the way back down into the individual molecules, chemically separating out any impurities, and then you're left with that virgin-like raw material.
So when you heat something up, right? If you heat it up too hot and there's in the presence of air, you're just going to burn it, right? Even if you remove the oxygen, there's a chance that you're just going to pyrolyze it. You're going to break it up into all sorts of tiny gas molecules as opposed to just styrene. What you really want to do is intentionally break it up in such a way that it reforms probably a double bond or something, which you're going to then use. That's what's present in the monomer, anyways. So is that catalyst driven, or how on earth do you do that to get specific bonds to reform and break as opposed to the whole thing breaking apart?
Yeah, so it'll depend on the different types of technology. I can say there are a few that we work with that don't use a catalyst. It's just done with heat.
Just with heat. Wow. Super rad. All right. Well, I meant that to be a brief introduction, but holy cow, that was too interesting. You've got my attention now. Um, Maybe you want to tell us the backstory behind the company or the invention? Like, how long's it been around? What's the story there?
Yeah, so INEOS Styrolution is about 10 years old. We're actually celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. We were founded in 2011, and the assets that we have are much older than that. So they have a history of being bought and sold through the various chemical industry players for many decades. But INEOS Styrolution specifically was founded in 2011. In 2017 is when we first began partnering with these advanced technology partners. So INEOS Styrolution will collaborate with younger, smaller companies who are developing these technologies, and then we'll collaborate together to bring them to market. And so we made our first partnership in 2017, and in addition to depolymerization, we also have partnerships with some of the different technologies like dissolution, which is taking the plastic and dissolving it in a solvent, and then separating out impurities and reprecipitating that back into polymer, as well as even some pyrolysis and gasification technologies as well, which are more varied and different, and that's even almost an umbrella
Yeah.
term now at this point.
So when you're partnering with these companies, can you maybe talk a little bit about the economic incentive for recycling these polymers? I mean, from my perspective, going through your website, it seems like a lot of these are fairly common or commonly used in industry. What's the advantage to recycling them for a company as opposed to just buying more stock?
Yeah.
Yeah, so well, INEOS Styrolution, of course, wants to be a part of the circular economy future, right? So this is what the market is asking for. I mean, there's been a huge shift in the plastics market recently. In 2018, the China sword policy totally changed the way that the waste market, disposes of the resins that ultimately we make. And we don't like our products being in the ocean or on the beaches. So it's really in our interest as well as everybody else's interest as well, right? We all share a common goal of a sustainable future. And so we want to be a part of that. And especially with the advanced recycling technologies, chemical processing is our expertise. That's what we're really good at. So we said, hey, we have the expertise to be able to make a difference here.
So tell me where you're at. So this sort of coincided with that change in the China policy on recycling. Was this in response to that, or was it not? Are you in sort of the startup phase where you're moving towards profitability? Are you already profitable selling products that tell us more about that.
Sure. So I think the China sword policy, along with just a greater recognition of what happens to our waste after we dispose of it in our society. So not only China saying we're not going to take the world's plastic anymore, but everyone becoming aware of the fact that China took our waste in the first place,
Yeah.
or our plastic waste anyway. So I think there's almost a perfect storm of policy, China sword being one example, and also just a general knowledge and concern about the environment. Of course, climate change is another aspect that is not independent of the plastic waste issue. So there's just a culmination of knowledge and concern and momentum towards finding these types of solutions at this point.
Cool. So when I check your website, I see that you obviously use styrofoam, and you've mentioned that. It's polystyrene, right? And I saw there are some other ones, ABS, a few other things. Why did you pick those polymers? Are they just the most widely used? Are they the easiest to decompose, to depolymerize, as you called it? Or why?
So why did we choose those polymers for recycling specifically, or in
Yeah, is it
produced
just
in the
because you
first
had the
place?
technical know-how to do those ones, or is it because there was just the most opportunity that they're the ones that are easy to come by, waste materials for, easily separated? What went into the selection process?
Sure. So there are, as you mentioned, a lot of factors. So some of them are the ease of the polymer for recycling. So, of course, plastics are highly engineered materials, and they vary widely from staples like polystyrene to, slightly more complex molecules like ABS. And then we have some additional specialties products as well that are even more innovative. And INEOS Styrolution got into those polymers because we see a need in the market. So, we develop a new product to meet a customer need or a demand. And it's a similar way in the recycling initiative. So polystyrene, of course, gets a lot of attention because it's a staple polymer. It's been around for a long time. It's in a lot of products that we use every day. And so that's a natural one to start with. And actually, the polystyrene molecule is very almost designed for recycling. It's very simple and it's very easy to break apart and to repolymerize back together. So there's not a lot of additional additives or side chains that are grafted onto the polymer chain in the case of polystyrene. So it makes it very simple to break apart and then fuse back together those molecules in the
Yeah,
chain.
and the benzene ring is more stable than maybe other things, and so maybe it's easier to break the bond connecting that to the backbone without messing with the benzene ring itself, I suppose.
Yes, good point. And so, yeah, that's a natural one for us to start with, and then ABS as well. So ABS is used in a lot of electronic waste, which actually is collected through specific programs for electronic waste. So those are all already sorted a little bit and make that waste available to us. And ABS is very well suited to mechanical recycling, hence our innovations in that area.
Cool.
What sort of losses do you get in the recycling process? I guess like what percent of it can actually be recovered from your, I guess, recyclable
Good
feedstock?
question.
Sure. So it will vary by the technology. Some are more efficient than others, and it just depends also on what you put in. So if you have very clean feedstock going in, you'll get a higher yield on the outlet. A lot of the advanced recycling technologies can handle higher levels of contamination than a traditional mechanical recycling process because, again, in mechanical, you're just melting it down and everything gets squished together and then comes out the other side. Whereas with advanced recycling, we do chemically separate those impurities through a chemical type of process. So that can handle higher levels of contamination. Um, and it just depends. You can also, there are different types of technology that can handle mixed waste plastic feeds. So polystyrene plus different types of polymers, and then perhaps get a pyrolysis oil or a naphtha fuel out the back end. So it all just depends on what technology you're using um, as far as what yield you're going to get.
Cool. So what's changed in the world in the last, 5-10 years when it comes to polymer recycling? Is this depolymerization technique new? Is this something you've patented? Is this been around a long time and I'm just ignorant to it? Like, tell us more about that.
Sure. So it's been around actually for several decades. The original patents, I think, maybe are from the 60s in terms of depolymerization for polystyrene. So it's been around for a while. Companies like Agilix, who's one of our technology partners, have commercialized that technology and written their own patents now in the last 10 years or so. So I think it's a culmination of um, some of the policies that we talked about, China Sword, but also the emergence and commercialization of some of these technologies, going from just an idea and a patent to really, demo processes that are up and running. In the case of Agilix, they currently have a demo facility in Oregon near Portland. So they're just, the scale is getting larger and nearer to commercialization
Wow.
to becoming a reality.
So do you think a circular economy is actually possible for polymers? Like, are there still going to be some key differences between this and, say, metal recycling, which is pretty broadly possible for different alloys?
Definitely. So I do believe a circular economy is possible. We have the tools that we need. And now the challenge is to collaborate across the value chain to develop the infrastructure and policies that align with that goal. So we envision there will be a lot of collaboration from everyone, from private industry, folks such as ourselves and Agilix, to public services and infrastructure to collect and sort and process waste for recycling, policy which supports those goals, and even the end consumer, to recycle and throw things in the recycle bin. And so definitely all those come together. I think we have the tools to make it a reality.
Cool.
One question that I had is it sounds like the INEOS is continuing to look at new polymers that they can attempt to, I guess, apply their technologies to or develop new technologies for. What are some of the challenges that you faced when looking at a new polymer that you were trying to either depolymerize or mechanically process?
Sure. So I think it's that borderline between trying to recover a single material and what counts as impurities. So when you're trying to recover styrene monomer, for instance, anything else can get separated out as an impurity. So that impurity stream, if you are feeding in specialty polymers that have additional additives going in as part of that, it's hard to then separate out those additives to recover those, in addition to the things that really are impurities like spaghetti sauce, or cheeseburger residuals or things like that. So I think really that's kind of step two. Polystyrene is a really great goal for us for step one. Polymers like ABS, that are already able to
Yeah.
be mechanically recycled. But I think there's additional innovation that will even happen down the road as these technologies scale up and as we move from again, from idea to implementation and then to optimize. I think part of that second phase of optimization is to further improve the technologies to recover additional um, aspects and process new polymers and improve that yield to ultimately realize a circular economy.
So maybe along those lines, we've talked about what you're doing right now. Tell me what the holy grail would be, right? If you're going to go after, like, what would be the next amazing untapped market for recycling polymers?
Right. So I I think that's a dangerous word, holy grail. We talk about a lot in sustainability. The more you learn about it, the more you realize that it's so complex, right? There's
Yeah.
no silver bullet or single solution to these issues. They're highly complex and they have a lot of passion and emotion behind them. However, I think a circular economy itself is the ultimate goal. And as we've discussed, we have the tools to get there. It's important that we use the tools at our disposal and our ability to innovate in order to create the world we want to live in. So instead of maybe starting with the outdated systems we have and trying to fit our world into those, innovation will always come back around and create new materials to replace the ones that we've outlawed.
Yeah.
So those may be even worse for the climate as a whole. So in this way,
Yeah.
we'll never achieve the sustainable systems we need. And instead, if we look ahead to implement improvements to our system and ultimately get to that circular economy, that's the holy grail.
Okay.
And how aggressive is INEOS in identifying new advances to its technologies or new potential solutions and trying to incorporate them? Things like advances in the literature or in academia.
Definitely. So I doubt there's an academic institution or a national lab today that doesn't have some sort of sustainability project or projects underway. So those researchers are always finding new ways to convert polymers into useful products or optimize the existing solutions, as we kind of mentioned earlier. So INEOS is always looking for the next, new technology that we can utilize. We have so many different types of specialty polymers that it behooves us to, investigate every single type of technology that's out there. We've partnered with universities around the world to continuously stay on top of these advances. So, for instance, we recently published the results from a project called Resolve, which was in partnership with the University of Bayreuth, and it proved the concept of closed loop recycling. So, certainly we're involved at every level and always interested to hear and talk about
Oh,
new
yeah.
exciting
So we
advances.
we just hired a new faculty this year and it's on polymer upcycling, right? And I just don't think 20 years ago when I was doing my degree that was even on my mind. It wasn't even on my radar. And now that was determined to be a top priority for our department, is not just a polymers person, but a polymers person dedicated towards converting waste polymers into something useful. So I think you're spot on in saying that the trend is moving that direction. So maybe one final question is, if somebody wanted to get involved or learn more, about this, where should they go?
Sure. So I think specific to styrenics and what INEOS Styrolution is doing, we have a website called styrolution-eco.com.
Okay.
So that's a microsite that has some really great videos demonstrating the processes that we've talked about today, as well as the new offerings that INEOS Styrolution has. Um, I think it's all around us. There's people doing really great things. Closed Loop Partners, for example, has some really great projects underway, um, and they're always, of course, welcome to reach out to INEOS Styrolution.
Okay. Very cool. Well, Cassie, thank you so much for joining us. What a fascinating technology. I love it when I learn something new.
Love it. Thank you so much for having me.
As always, one of the sponsors of our show is MatMatch, and we're grateful for their patronship of this podcast. When we're talking about recycling, it makes me so glad to know that when I hop over to MatMatch and I type in their search box, you can select. When I started typing recycling, it immediately prompted recycled content. And when I click that box, what it pulls up is all of their products, which are recycled content. How cool is that? They not only know and understand that this is going to be a circular economy, but they're actually catering to it by helping you as a person who's looking for the next engineering material select just from those that are recycled content. So they've got one that's biological, 314 ceramics, over 300 composites, over 300 glasses, over 20,000 different metals, over 6,000 recycled polymers. So this is not just a few that you get to pick from. They have quite a few focused on recycled content there. That's the sort of stuff that we get from MatMatch, and this website makes it easy to find it. So if you haven't looked them up before, head over to matmatch.com. We think you're really going to like it.
The Materialism podcast is also sponsored by Materials Today. You can visit materialstoday.com to stay up to date on the latest happenings in the material science field and read some of their fantastic articles that they've published. They have several on managing e-waste, and they have several on depolymerization, so you should definitely head over there and check them out. You can also head over to elsevier.com to find more about their journals, books, conferences, and related programs.
Okay, and as always, a big thanks to people that make the show possible, our audio people, Colobyte and AlphaBot. And if you've got an idea for an episode, reach out to us. Find us on Instagram. That's at materialism.podcast. You can send us an email. That's materialism.podcast@gmail.com. And we would love to hear your feedback, especially if it's in the form of a review on iTunes. So if you haven't done that yet, slam us a review. Just don't mention how great Jared is at the audio. It gets to his head.
Catch you next time.
Okay, we'll see you next time.